All right, good morning. This is the June 2nd, 2022 meeting of the Subdivision Committee meeting for the City of Fayetteville. I'm Commissioner Sarah Sparkman sitting in for the Chair, Mary Madden. We're also here with Matt Johnson and Andrew Brink, Commissioners online. Also here with City staff. We'll go ahead and get started. There's nothing on the consent agenda, so we will start with our first item of old business, which is LSD 2022-014, large-scale development submitted by Community by Design for properties located at 3220 West Old Farmington Road. The property is zoned neighborhood conservation and it contains approximately 20.4 acres. The request is for the development of three cluster housing developments containing 28 residences, and our planner is Ryan Umberger.
Morning. The subject property is in southwest Fayetteville, so this is just south of Centennial Park, and it's a property you all are likely familiar with at this point. We've had a couple of rezoning requests come through recently, and the conditional use permit for a cluster housing development that was approved on the property last year. Most recently, at the April 19th, 2022 City Council meeting, the property was rezoned from RSFA to NC Neighborhood Conservation. The property has substantial topography. It slopes down from the north boundary to the two small ponds that are covered by that subject property label in the middle. And then after that, as it progresses further south, the property does level out somewhat. And the northern extents of this property do fall within the Hillside Hilltop Overlay District. The other site characteristics that you might notice here is there is a protected stream that runs along the western side of the property. That's indicated in that floodplain zone A, I believe. The request is a large-scale development approval to develop the subject property with 3 cluster housing developments that would be composed of 28 residential units. This property has frontage along Old Farmington Road, which is down on the southwest side. Old Farmington Road is a partially improved residential link street, as 25 feet of right-of-way dedicated from the center line, and it does have open ditches. The applicant proposes and staff recommends a 1 foot of right-of-way be dedicated with the development to bring that right-of-way into compliance with the current master street plan requirements. For the internal streets, the applicant is proposing public streets throughout the development, and staff is recommending that the internal streets are constructed as they are, the internal streets are dedicated, the right-of-way in there is dedicated as it was conditioned in the conditional use permit. So that would be right-of-way dedication in the amount of 34.5 feet for those internal streets. And we'll get into a little bit more of a discussion of that with the street improvements on this item. As far as those street improvements go, Old Farmington Road is a partially improved residential link street with asphalt paving and open ditches. Based on the provided traffic study, staff is recommending that the developer is responsible for building out a portion of the infrastructure improvements at the intersection of MLK and 1 Mile Road. Staff is requesting that the applicant provide an estimate for widening the north leg of the intersection to include a southbound left turn lane, a southbound through and drive turn lane, and a northbound receiving lane. And the estimate should also include costs for modifying the traffic signal for northbound and southbound movements. I think from staff's perspective, that's information that we would like to see prior to the item going to Planning Commission to be able to offer a firm determination on what we're recommending for improvements along Old Farmington. And then in terms of the internal streets, the applicant is proposing public streets throughout the development. They're proposing internal streets with 34 feet of right-of-way dedication, 6 foot sidewalks, 7 foot a 7 foot on-street parking lane, and curb and gutter in the right-of-way. They're also proposing a 6-foot sidewalk and 4 feet of green space and trees. Street trees are proposed within a 10-foot easement adjoining the right-of-way. And so attached there, you can see the street section that the applicant is proposing with for their internal streets. This is different than what was approved with the conditional use permit, and staff is recommending that the internal streets are built out to what they were recommended with the conditional use permit. The most significant difference here is the applicant is proposing a 6-foot sidewalk at the back of the curb, and staff is recommending in the conditional use permit it requires a 6.5-foot sidewalk on either side of those streets. So staff is recommending that improvements include right-of-way dedication of 34.5 feet, 6.5-foot sidewalks, a 7-foot on-street parking lane, and curb and gutter in the right-of-way. And then in that easement, it would be a 6.5-foot sidewalk and 4 feet of green space and street trees in the proposed easement. We do have, and then also just infrastructure outside of the right-of-way, including any alleys, shall be owned and maintained by property owners association, and that's in line with the conditions in the conditional use permit. So another nuance of this street improvements discussion is that since it was a condition of approval at the conditional use permit stage, it's not a variance that they need to ask for. It's a amendment to the conditional use permit. And the applicant has submitted an application to amend the conditional use permit, and that is scheduled to be heard at the June 27th Planning Commission meeting. So these are just on slightly altered timelines as far as when the items will reach the Planning Commission. Go back a little bit. So in terms of access management and connectivity, we've determined that the project partially meets the access and connectivity requirements. Access is provided to separate parking courts that are intended to serve each cluster development. 20-foot wide private drives serve each cluster development with 2 curb cuts proposed onto Street B. So you can see faintly a curb cut to the north cluster development where my mouse is hovering, and then another curb cut to the south there. And then the cluster development with these 4 units on the south side would utilize a existing 20-foot wide private access easement. Each of the curb cuts along Street B are located at least 50 feet away from the adjacent driveways, which meets our separation requirements for a residential link street. And each of the parking courts function independently as a private circulation system that's going to accommodate both vehicular and pedestrian access to the structures. The reason that we find that it partially meets access management connectivity standards is that the applicant has requested a variance to our Unified Development Code for the effective curb radius for a residential link street. So typically, the standard that we would look for is a 15, the typical standard is a 15-foot effective curb radius, and the applicant is proposing a 15-foot effective turn radius. The actual curb radius is a little unclear. We haven't had a dimension on the provided site plans to date, but we are supportive of the variance request. While the applicant is not meeting the letter of the ordinance, we do find that they're demonstrating an intent to meet the spirit and intent of the code. They describe the rationale behind the variance request as to slow vehicle turning motions in the interest of pedestrian safety. They suggest that the typical requirement would likely require the sidewalk to change course to make room for a driveway apron, and it may encourage higher vehicle turning speeds as they intersect with the sidewalk that would be going across the driveway. Staff finds that the context of this proposed development, that it is a cluster housing development planned within a larger network of cluster housing developments, factors into the discussion of this variance request. While a smaller curb radius might not be appropriate in other situations, we find that a anticipated low vehicle volume and slower traffic speeds would be complementary to this development pattern without sacrificing traffic or pedestrian safety. And so we find that the proposed circulation system is not going to have a negative impact on vehicular or pedestrian safety, and we're recommending approval of that variance request. And then I guess I did not include the elevations with this, so in terms of the design standards, we find that the project is compliant with the ordinance for cluster housing development. The proposal is meeting requirements for density, bulk in area, setbacks, and building height. And the cluster housing requirements for parking have also been met. These units exceed 1,000 square feet in gross floor area, and so that allows developers to choose to provide parking at a rate of 1 space per bedroom. Across the 3 cluster developments, 58 bedrooms are proposed and 58 spaces are provided. An additional 16 on-street spaces are also provided that would assist in accommodating future phases of the development and parking for guests. Though the elevations aren't included in this presentation, we did evaluate those, finding that each cluster housing development is going to be developed with unique structures that meet our requirements and varying in terms of the exterior finishes, the floor plan and area for those units, porch orientation and or the roof shape. And then I will, I guess, just highlight some of the things that you'll likely be hearing from some of our other staff members. The applicant, in terms of water and sewer, the applicant is intending to extend water and sanitary sewer service throughout the development. The property currently has access to a 6-inch water main along the north side of Old Farmington Road, and the property has access to a 6-inch sanitary sewer main along the south side of Old Farmington. This project was discussed at Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting at their March 7th meeting, and Parks recommended a fee in lieu for this development in the amount of $30,492 based on the 28 single-family units. And that would be required to be paid prior to building permits. And then in terms of tree preservation, the minimum canopy requirement for neighborhood conservation is 20%, and the existing canopy is 69%. They are preserving, I believe, 7.8%, and so the mitigation that would be required would be 109 2-inch caliber trees. I guess the last thing on that issue slide that I did want to hit on was just the public comment we've received. So we haven't received any comments that were in favor or opposition to the development, but we did receive a phone inquiry from a nearby neighbor, and they expressed a desire to have improvements along West Old Farmington Road. They said that the open ditches were inadequate to handle the current runoff that's occurring from storms that we've been seeing. So with that said, we are recommending that the item be forwarded to the full planning commission. We're recommending in favor of with the conditions as outlined by staff. So that would be a recommendation of the recommended right-of-way, the recommended street improvements, and in favor of a variance to the curb radii dimensions. And I can stand for any other questions that you have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Umberger. I am going to open it up to city staff at this time, starting with engineering. Is anyone with engineering online who can speak to this item?
Yes, good morning, Josh, engineering. We do have a few comments on this development. And just to provide some more information, as far as water and sewer, applicants extending 8-inch mains throughout the site to serve the future homes. There is one thing with the sewer. Right now, applicants proposing to send sewer flow to the west side treatment plant. There's a 15-inch line in Old Farmington and in West Saunders Street that we're asking the applicant to connect to in order to send that flow to the east toward the Noland treatment facility off of Woods Fox Trail, I believe is the street. But if they can't get it to the 15-inch line, we're asking for a capacity analysis downstream immediately. Looks like there's a few pinch points that could pose problems. As far as drainage, the applicant's proposing a few ways to meet standards, city standards, permeable pavement, infiltration trenches, bioretention, and a temporary detention pond until future phases of this development are constructed or approved. There's a bit more information we're going to need as far as the infiltration trenches and how they're proposing to treat runoff. It looks like there's a possibility that some runoff is going to bypass the feature, which would result in some untreated flow coming from the site. Brian did mention some drainage issues along Old Farmington. As part of this development, we had the applicant do an off-site downstream analysis for drainage. That there's some culverts that are existing on Old Farmington at 3110 and 3052, which have a pretty low capacity, about 10 cubic feet per second. They're not sized adequately. They weren't installed to handle the flow that's coming down Old Farmington. This development isn't negatively impacting that. They're actually decreasing the flow rate going to each culvert for the storm events that they analyzed. And so we're not recommending off-site improvements as far as drainage goes. For streets and traffic, we did ask the applicant to produce a traffic study to analyze how their development is going to impact near intersections. So one thing that we are requesting, and based on that traffic study, the developer would be responsible for a portion of the infrastructure improvements at the Martin Luther King and 1 Mile Road intersection. So the light on MLK, 1 mile, and then Finger Road, which goes south toward Walmart. So we're asking for an estimate as far as widening the north leg of the intersection. That would be 1 mile to include a southbound left turn lane, southbound through right turn lane, and the northbound receiving lane. So what that intersection could be improved to, and then also estimating the costs for modifying the traffic signal at that intersection. And then based on those estimates, we'll be able to kind of assign a impact that the development might be having to the overall intersection. So we're recommending that be done prior to Planning Commission to give us adequate time to review that cost estimate and make a recommendation. But we too are recommending the item be forwarded to the Planning Commission.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Ricaccio. Is there anyone else from city staff who wishes to speak to this item?
Yes, this is John Scott, the urban forester. As he had mentioned before, they started out with 69% on their existing canopy, and they're down to 7.8%, and they're showing they're going to need 100 with 109 trees on top. As my understanding, this was reviewed by Melissa. And she's asking for a couple of other things on this that are noted in there. Some status on the trees and the tree inventory is something she would like to see before this. We're also recommending this move forward because it needs to be stamped by a landscape architect, and then we'd like to see some more
All right, thank you, Mr. Scott. Is there anyone else from city staff who wishes to speak to this item? All right, seeing none, I'm gonna open it up to the applicant. Mr. T, you're recognized.
Thank you, Commissioner Sparkman. Good morning. Brian Teague with Community by Design, representing the property owner and developer. This project is somewhat of a continuation of a project that we started on adjacent property to the east. We've constructed about 12 or 13 homes so far. That's a part of a 28 home development, large-scale development. I think that was approved last year. Of course, we acquired new property to the west and brought a conditional use permit forward to the Planning Commission in December or January, 5 or 6 months ago. And just generally what we're trying to accomplish with this project is very similar to the project that we currently have under construction. We have a handful of details that we're trying to pull from that initial large-scale development that's under construction. It's, even though we're not technically in the hillside overlay district with this project, we're trying to be more compact with our development footprint in order to preserve areas on the edges of the property. Also, we're trying to be more walkable with our streets and all of the common open spaces that we are proposing. And I appreciate staff working with us on some variances to accomplish a lot of those different things. Let's see. Some other things that I should probably touch on. John, since you gave the last staff presentation, what we had set up with Melissa was to provide off-site tree preservation, and I didn't understand that we were proposing mitigation. I don't know. Maybe we could just look into that at a later time. The off-site tree preservation would be located on the adjacent property immediately to the east of the project. I did have a call with Mr. Merton, who is a neighbor immediately to the south of the property, yesterday. I've had some other visits with him as we've been under construction over there in the past as well. We talked about drainage quite a bit. Obviously there's a significant amount of water coming off of the hillside, and our drainage proposal, as it affects the neighbor immediately to the south, we've reduced that drainage basin significantly and kind of moved the flow to the east off of that property to a detention pond that we're proposing with this project. I also talked to Mr. Merton about potentially providing more screening, whether that be in the form of vegetation or fences, and we're happy to provide that. I think I'm probably forgetting something, but
We'll ask if you forgot.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this item? If so, if you'll raise your virtual hand, you will be recognized. All right, seeing no one online, I will open it up to my fellow commissioners. Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Brink, do you have any comments, questions?
I'll go ahead and get us started. There's a lot of moving pieces to this. It seems like even things aren't fully figured out. And so I'm good with staff's recommendation of moving this forward to the Board Planning Commission. There's a lot of variances, so we're going to have to discuss those as a group regardless. So I'm in favor of moving this forward.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Brink, do you have any comments?
So I think Commissioner Johnson did on my thoughts.
All right. And I will give a ditto to that. It sounds like there is quite a bit to be worked out on a staff level as well. And well, we have a good idea of what's going on. It's certainly not the complete picture. So be open to any motions from my fellow commissioners.
Chair, I'll go ahead and move that we forward LSD 2022-014 to the full Planning Commission.
All right, do you have a recommendation associated with that, Commissioner Johnson?
Yes, let me go ahead and pull that up. I'll be voting in recommendation in favor of the recommended right-of-way dedications, in favor of the recommended street improvements, in favor of the requested variance for curb radii dimensions and all other conditions as recommended by staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Do we have a second?
That'll come from me.
All right, and then I will be the third vote in favor of that. So this will be forwarded to the full Planning Commission with a recommendation of approval. Thank you, Mr. Teague. All right.
You asked for virtual, if anybody from the public wanted to speak virtually,
Yes.
I'm
Okay, well, we're gonna back up. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here as to
Yes.
this item. So if you'll take a seat, we'll recognize you on that. I'm not closing this item, we have voted on it, but and we can always reconsider if there is something that you have brought to our attention that we need to incorporate into anything. So I'll go right ahead. If you'll state your name and your address.
My name is David Merton. I am the owner of the property at 3052. That's my residence, and also on 3064. Coming here today with concerns. First, drainage. Drainage has been discussed with other developments along this line. There are culverts. Old Farmington Road, I've lived there all these years, was a dirt road, and those culverts were there when that was a dirt road. I think problems have been aggravated by my witness during this time. Recently, this last big rain event we had, there was some flood damage at 3017, and it was the granular fill from phase 1 of this project. It filled the ditch, and it spilled out and tried to go to the White River Basin instead of the Illinois. Mr. Teague addressed my concerns that I had with him about screening. Currently, and for the last 50 years, this property has been kind of like an RSF for single-level homes, and these what's proposed towers over. It significantly changes the privacy that I have on my property. With it being within 20 foot of my property line, I envision windows 25 feet up above me looking in it, and I would like to see some screening. I really feel like this clashes with my current lifestyle and quality of life. I'm glad to hear that there's going to be some improvements proposed at that intersection, because people that don't live there maybe don't realize that large amount of traffic from all these other commercial developments, Pure Spirit, and then there's a lot of cut-through traffic on Old Farmington Road, but there's only one light to go back to town, and that intersection underperforms. And I want everyone to know that I'm happy about that, but with the special events we have at Centennial Park, which is a beautiful asset to that neighborhood, I would like y'all to look north up 1 Mile Road and consider that a school bus and a normal sized vehicle really can't meet on 1 Mile Road without there being some problems. On my way to work in the morning, if I meet the school bus, I have to mount the curb for the school bus to pass. And I would like to see the city possibly, those are older homes in there. I'd like to see them maybe catch up that little stretch if possible. And I appreciate you letting me talk, thank you.
Okay, appreciate that, and just as far as, we'll get some of these addressed for you, get some of these questions answered. So as far as the screening standards, I guess this question for staff, does the current proposal meet the minimum standards required for screening?
It does. We don't have specific requirements for residential properties to be screened from other adjoining residential properties. So any screening that is proposed is something that is done voluntarily by the applicant.
Okay, so all that we can require them to do with what we have before us is to require any minimums, and beyond that, that would have to be voluntary by the applicant, that's correct?
Yep.
Okay, as far as drainage goes, it seems like there may be some stuff that needs to be worked out by staff. It's my understanding that this does have to meet the minimum standards for drainage requirements for any development within the city.
Correct.
All right, and if there were to be anything that needed to be, or that was determined that should be added, it would either need to come from the applicant or it would need to be a determination from staff that additional measures need to be taken to meet those minimum requirements.
I think that's likely correct. I may just defer to engineering for specificity if Josh has anything he wants to add to that.
Mr. Boccaccio, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Not at this time. I think staff is aware of the drainage issues along Old Farmington, and it's definitely a project that we have on the books to take a look at. With recent rain events throughout the city, there's a lot of those, so we're aware of it. We know that those culverts, there's some drainage issues there, so that's kind of, I don't think this project, like I said previously, this project isn't negatively impacting that downstream drainage, so it's not, I don't think it's something that we can require them to do right now.
Okay, and then since you're on the line, we had our citizen ask about street improvements. Could you just briefly go over that real quickly?
Yeah, so as far as, street improvements for this development, I don't think they have very much actual frontage on Old Farmington. What we are looking at, like I mentioned, is that intersection of MLK and 1 Mile Road. RDOT is in the process of designing some interchange improvements at MLK and I-49, and some of that seems like it could extend all the way down to this intersection. So there'll be some capacity improvements. They will hopefully improve the level of service there. And then along Old Farmington Road, when the city installed all the infrastructure at Centennial Park, we added a trail and sidewalk or trail, curb and gutter along that frontage. So as properties along Old Farmington are redeveloped, that's something that we'll be looking at as far as improving the width of that street and capacity of that street.
All right, thank you very much. Hopefully that answered some questions or at least gave some context to some of that and what the commission's role will be in this. So seeing that we have any additional information, do we have anything further from our commissioners on this item? All right, seeing nothing, then this item is moved forward as approved, and we thank you for your comments, thank you for your presentation, and we'll move on to our next item of business. We're moving on to new business. Our item 2 on our agenda is CCP 2022-005, concurrent plat by Blue & Associates for property located at 4875 West Bittersweet Drive. The property is in the Fayetteville planning area and contains approximately 40.24 acres. The request is for the concurrent plat of 3 residential lots, and our planner is Ms. Masters.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. So yes, the item before you today is a concurrent plat. It is a large parcel of land, and apparently our GIS did not pick up the entire thing for this slide, so I do apologize for that. So I will go ahead and switch over to this here to give you an idea of the full extent. So this property is located in the Fayetteville planning area, just outside of the city limits. It's immediately adjacent to the Huemont subdivision, which is just to the east of it. The property does contain approximately 40.24 acres, and it currently contains 1 single-family dwelling. It's largely otherwise undeveloped. The applicant, in this instance, you may be familiar with this site. A few other concurrent plats and property line adjustments have come through on this site somewhat recently. The applicant is requesting to subdivide this property into two, basically cut out two pieces of land, so they would concurrently plat 3 lots in total. One of the properties is going to contain approximately 2.12 acres, and the other would have approximately 1.77. The parent tract has been subdivided a number of times, which is why it's coming through as a concurrent plat rather than just an administrative lot split. With this request, the applicant is also requesting a variance to the Washington County minimum lot width standard of 75 feet. Going into some of the more details, the water and sewer system, the overall site does have access to City of Fayetteville water, but is proposed to be served by septic rather than city sewer since it is located outside of the city limits. As far as right-of-way to be dedicated, the property does have 3 points of access to the site. Each of these are essentially stub outs from the Humont subdivision, so we have 50 feet of frontage in each of where these are showing. We're not recommending any additional right-of-way dedication at this time, since that's sort of being accounted for with the variance request as far as access to these properties is concerned. That's kind of the one issue that staff is identifying with this project. So the access to the site in question is provided along those street stub outs that we just talked about. Washington County does require that there's a minimum of 75 feet of street frontage. Kind of zooming back in, each of these lots will essentially have 50 feet of frontage along public right-of-way, which is less than the typical minimum. Oftentimes, if Washington County prefers that some form of access easement is dedicated when the request is less than the typical street frontage. In this instance, staff is not actually recommending that since it does look like the site would have access to a street. It just is less than the typical requirement. So a lot of times those access easements are dedicated if perhaps a lot is being developed maybe behind another in sort of a tandem lot configuration, but in this instance that doesn't appear to be the case. So we are recommending in favor. We do find that the applicant could maintain reasonable access to all 3 of those lots that are under review. And again, just not finding that an additional access easement would necessarily be necessary in this instance. We aren't recommending any additional street improvements, and then tree preservation and parkland does not apply in this case because they are outside the city limits. We have not received any public comment on the item, and with that, we are recommending that the item be forwarded to the Planning Commission with the recommendation of approval in favor of that requested variance for lots with less than 75 feet of street frontage, and then in favor of staff's recommendation for right-of-way dedication of street improvements. And I can answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you very much. I imagine we don't have much city staff comments since this is a county property.
We do not. Engineering did write a memo on it if you'd like to ask them.
All right, Mr. Bracacio, do you have any comments on this?
The only comment we have is we're recommending approval. When the project came through tech plat, we did have some concerns as far as water access goes. But after communicating with the applicant and then getting some background on previous lot splits and property line adjustments on this parcel, we're okay with recommending it be approved.
All right, thank you very much. Anyone else from city staff?
No.
All right, then I will open it up to the applicant. Do we have a representative from the applicant's team online?
We have a Nathan Crouch who has raised his hand.
All right, we'll recognize Mr. Crouch.
Good morning, this is Nathan Crouch representing this project in Blue and Associates. I can answer any questions here.
Okay, appreciate you. Do we have any members of the public online who wish to speak to this item?
We do not currently.
All right, then I will open it up to my fellow commissioners.
This is Commissioner Johnson. I don't have much to say, but I'm good with moving this forward to full planning commission.
All right, is this eligible for consent since it has a variance on it?
Yes, we can put variances on consent.
Okay, so that would be my question, because if for someone to make a motion to recommend to approve it and with the recommendation to go on the consent agenda, that's what I'd be in favor of. Commissioner Brink, do you have any comments?
None other than I would like to be on consent.
All right, I'll make the motion. I don't have the motion in front of me, but I would move to, forward, I move to forward CCP 2022-05 to the full planning commission with a recommendation of approval and recommendation it be placed on the consent agenda.
Second, Commissioner Johnson.
All right, Commissioner Brink, you good? All right, now I'm gonna take the thumbs up as an affirmative vote, and therefore we will be forwarding this to the full planning commission with a recommendation it be placed on the consent agenda. All right, thank you all very much. Our next item of business is LSD 2022-09, large-scale development submitted by ESI for property located at 2364 South Armstrong Avenue. The property is zoned I-2 General Industrial and contains approximately 24.3 acres. The request is for a 48,000 square foot expansion of an existing facility, and our planner is Jesse Masters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's up here. All right, so we're talking about another relatively large property here, so our GIS map did not get the entire extent on there, so I do apologize for that, but here's a better image for you. So this is a large-scale development. It's been submitted by ESI, property located at 2364 South Armstrong Avenue. As you mentioned, the property is zoned I-2 General Industrial. It is located on the southeast corner of East Pump Station Road and South Armstrong Avenue in Fayetteville's Industrial Park. It's currently the home of a facility for Marshalltown Tools. The applicant today is requesting large-scale development approval for a 48,000 square foot expansion to their existing facility. The applicant is requesting a variance to the typical master street plan standards, which will be discussed in a later minute on that. So as far as right-of-way to be dedicated, I did want to highlight there, the area under question for expansion is highlighted there in green. As far as right-of-way to be dedicated, the East Pump Station Road is designated as a neighborhood link street, which typically requires right-of-way dedication in the amount of 33.5 feet from the street center line. Staff is recommending that the applicant dedicate that right-of-way at that location to meet the master street plan standards. The site plan is not currently showing that dedication right now, but that is our recommendation. Along South Armstrong Avenue, staff is not recommending any additional right-of-way dedication along that street frontage, since there is currently ample right-of-way meeting the master street plan standards for neighborhood link streets. And then so as far as street improvements go, East Pump Station Road is designated as a neighborhood link street per the master street plan, which typically requires an 8-foot sidewalk and 10-foot green space. The applicant has requested a variance to the typical master street plan standards for that street's frontage, given the existence of a 5-foot sidewalk and green space that were constructed in approximately 2017 in compliance with the master street plan standards at that time, with an expansion that they did at that time. So we are actually recommending in favor of the request for the applicant to not install sidewalks to meet the master street plan along that location. We do find that the roughly proportional impact of basically tearing out a 5-year-old sidewalk and building a new one would be exceeded with the applicant's proposed development. There is, again, that existing 5-foot sidewalk. It's less than 5 years old. And again, we think that is a reasonable request at this location at this time. We do recommend though that they do dedicate the right-of-way along South Pump Station Road to the amount of the master street plan standards, as I mentioned previously. Along South Armstrong Avenue, however, it is also designated as a neighborhood link street per the master street plan, which again typically requires an 8-foot sidewalk and 10-foot green space. Staff is recommending that the South Armstrong Avenue frontage be constructed to the typical master street plan standards with that 8-foot sidewalk and 10-foot green space, and we are recommending that that sidewalk be moved to be within the existing right-of-way. The applicant has not submitted a variance request to improvements along the South Armstrong Avenue frontage. The site plan is not currently showing an intent to install street improvements along that property's frontage. So it may be that the applicant intends to submit a variance for both both of the street frontages, but that's staff's recommendation currently. So it may be something that needs to get worked out at the planning commission level. we did, in accordance with that, we did notice also that in between the tech plat submission and the subdivision committee one, I did not mention this in the report, but the applicant did add additional parking that was not included on the tech plat submission. So that's part of what may seem like a moving target on the street plan, or on the street improvements, is trying to figure out what the overall impact of the project's expansion really is and how to determine what's roughly proportional in this instance. So that's a recommendation that at this time, we may need some more information from the applicant on that. As far as access management and connectivity, the property currently has access through 3 existing driveways along South Armstrong Avenue and 1 existing driveway along South Pump Station Road, East Pump Station Road. We're not recommending any changes there. Industrial use, as far as design standards go, industrial uses outside of the I-540 overlay district are not subject to any design standards for the UDC. So just showing those elevations, they're meeting any applicable design standards because none of them are applicable. For water and sewer, the water and sewer access is not changing with this expansion. The applicant is intending to use their existing service for both. And then as far as parkland dedication goes, this project is not subject to those requirements because it's not a residential project. Moving on to tree preservation, they do have a minimum requirement of 15%. There's an existing canopy of 8.6% and a preserved canopy of about 8.6%. But given the slight differential between the existing and preserved canopy, there will be 1 2-inch caliper tree that is required for mitigation. We have not received any public comment on the item to date. There's a little bit of a discussion there about the variance on the street improvements requirement, and at this time we are recommending that the item be forwarded to the Planning Commission with the recommendation of approval, subject to staff's subdivision committee recommendation of right-of-way dedication, the recommendation of street improvements, and then there are some additional plat comments from the planning division and some other conditions of approval from engineering and urban forestry that need to be met. I can answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Masters. We'll open it up to city staff. We'll start with Mr. Boccaccio. Do you have any comments on this item?
Yes. The main one's gonna be revolving around drainage and some natural features, but we'll get to that in here in a minute. As far as water and sewer, as Ms. Masters stated, they're not proposing any new connections. There is an existing fire line that's gonna have to be relocated. Right now it's shown as underneath the building expansion, so that's gonna have to be realigned. The plan submitted similar to any other sort of public water line realignment. So that's the only thing as far as utilities go. On the drainage and some natural features to this site, it's pretty close to the White River, I believe, is that one. So it's a portion of it is located in a special flood hazard area. They're not proposing to impact that, but there is kind of an association with that, some hydric soils, which may be an indicator of wetlands. Previously, on an expansion project that Marshalltown did, they installed a wetland pond in the northeast corner of the site. They're proposing to modify that right now. But one thing that we'll need before any sort of modification is done to that pond is a jurisdictional determination from the Corps of Engineers, stating whether or not they would consider that feature a waters of the U.S. Feature where a section 404 permit would be required for any sort of modification to it. That's all things that can be worked out during grading permit. We had a few comments on the plans as far as drafting and some connection for the fire line, but other than that, we're recommending you move forward.
All right, thank you, Mr. Boccaccio. I'll open it up to urban forestry now. Mr. Scott, do you have any comments on this item?
No additional comments, thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else online from city staff who wishes to speak to this item?
I believe Nathan Wood from Fire may be on.
Does Nathan Wood with Fire, do you have any comments on this item?
No, Fire has no other comment.
All right, thank you very much. If there is no other comment from city staff, I will go ahead and open it up to the applicant at this time. Do we have someone on? Oh, we already did. We'll open up the applicant. Do we do that?
Yes, the applicant has the opportunity.
Okay, all right. Any comments from the public? All right, seeing none, I will open that up to the commission.
I'm sorry, did you want to hear from the applicant? We do have a Brandon Rush.
Okay, that's fine.
He is ready to speak.
All right, Mr. Rush.
Brandon Rush with ESI, happy to answer any questions, but I think staff covered it pretty well.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this item before I open it up to my fellow commissioners? All right, Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Brink, I'll open it up to you.
Commissioner Johnson, Scott did a great job laying this one out. Seems pretty straightforward with the need for the variance. This will have to go to the full planning commission meeting, so I'll go ahead and just move that we forward LSD 2022-009 with conditions in favor of the recommended right-of-way dedication, in favor of the recommended street improvements, and all other conditions as recommended by staff.
We'll second that.
All right, and also be voting in favor, so we will be moving this forward to the full planning commission with recommendations as stated in the motion. All right, we on item 4 now?
Yes.
Sorry, I've not had enough coffee this morning.
I've had too much. So.
Oh, well, yeah. All right, well, between the two of us, we have a sufficient amount of caffeine. All right, then we'll move to item 4, LSD 2022-015, a large-scale development at West Weddington Drive, 51002, submitted by ESI. The property is zoned NSG, Neighborhood Services General, and contains approximately 1.46 acres. The request is for two 7,800 square foot commercial buildings and associated parking, and our planner is Ms. Masters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, the property in this instance is in West Fayetteville. It is on the south side of West Weddington Drive, and it's approximately halfway between North 54th Avenue and North Royals Avenue, just to give the commission some orientation. The subject property encompasses approximately 1.46 acres. Part of the property, approximately this portion here, is currently being final platted with the associated subdivision to the south. As a commercial lot that was associated with that subdivision. That subdivision is formerly known as Weddington Place, but is now being referred to by the developer as Roxon Duplexes. The property in question, this section here, is zoned NSG, Neighborhood Services General, and a portion, approximately this portion of it, does have a bill of assurance attached to it, limiting the uses to Use Unit 1, citywide uses by right, Use Unit 12B, general businesses, and Use Unit 40, sidewalk cafe. The entire site is subject to the uses as outlined in NSG typically. So the request before you today is a large-scale development approval of two 7,800 square foot commercial structures and associated parking under Use Unit 12B, which is permitted under the current zoning district and with that bill of assurance. No variance requests have been submitted, though staff identifies through our review that there is still some further information from the applicant needed to ensure all ordinances are being met, and I will go into that here in a second. So as far as, we'll just start about that right-of-way. As far as right-of-way dedication, we are not recommending any additional right-of-way dedication either along Weddington or along Crater Street. There is ample right-of-way in both scenarios. This street was just platted with the subdivision, and it is currently meeting our typical standards for residential link streets, and West Weddington Drive currently has actually more than enough right-of-way to meet our typical street standards there. As far as street improvements go, we are recommending that along West Weddington Drive, they have constructed sidewalk along the Weddington Drive frontage that was platted with that final plat, and they are showing, and staff was recommending that they continue, finish up that sidewalk for the rest of the property's frontage. That would be built to a standard of a 10-foot trail and 10-foot green space, since this is part of the active transportation plan for trails. Along Crater Street, we are recommending along this property's frontage that the applicant install 6-foot sidewalk and 6-foot green space to finish out that sidewalk that's currently being developed with that plat, and construct that to those master street plan standards as was intended. As far as access management and connectivity, the applicant is showing an intent to access the property from the lower classification street of Crater Street, so that is meeting our ordinance there. They are also showing they do have a retaining wall to the on the western property line, but they are showing intention to dedicate an access easement here, so that should this property develop, there would be an opportunity to make that connection in the future. So we are finding that they are meeting the ordinance requirements for connectivity for commercial properties in this instance. So where we start to run into a couple issues here is with our design standards. So the applicant, the project is subject to two separate design standard requirements in our ordinance. So they are subject to 166.25, our commercial office and mixed use design and development standards, as well as to 166.24, which are non-residential design standards. Since the project is in a form-based zoning district, that includes a build-to zone. We are finding the applicant is mostly in compliance with these standards. A lot of them are site-related. But we are noting that the applicant's principal facades appear to be predominantly metal based on the percentages that the applicant has provided to us. So the principal facades would be both the northern facades and the eastern facade would need to be less than 50% metal, and the applicant's calculations are showing a few different types of metal being used. I'll try to zoom in. It may not, it's not legible. Hopefully it's legible in your packet. But they are showing basically several different types of metal, and the percentage is greater than 50% in both of those instances, which is where we're still having that issue there. We have not received a variance request to that standard, so we don't know yet whether staff would necessarily support that variance, but we are, but that is currently an outstanding issue. We also find that based on the requirements in 166.24, the mass of the buildings is typically required to be delineated for buildings that are longer than 100 feet in the street's frontage, as these are. They typically have to be basically delineated into basically 40-foot wide segments that use changes in height and depth of the wall plane. So some illustrations of that are shown in our code, but basically the building has to be kind of subdivided into some sections or chunks, for lack of a more technical term, where portions of it are being brought forward and portions of it are being kind of held back. We're finding that they're not currently meeting that standard as the building is designed, so just another issue that we've not received a variance for and is not currently meeting ordinance. Those are just some items that we wanted to bring to the Commission's consideration. The applicant has also stated that the use is compliant with use unit 12B, which is typically limited to commercial uses and does not permit the types of uses that are not permitted under use unit 12B would be things like warehousing or storage units, which the applicant has asserted that this property is not going to be. So with that, as far as water and sewer, an 8-inch water line is proposed to be extended to serve this project. The applicant is proposing to connect to the adjacent subdivision with private sewer lines. Parkland dedication is not required for this project, and as far as tree preservation goes, the existing canopy minimum requirement is 20%. The existing canopy is at 19.3%. The applicant is preserving 8.7%, so they will be required to mitigate with 32 2-inch caliber trees. We have not received any public comment on the item to date. We are recommending, even though there are still some of those outstanding issues with the design standards, we are recommending the item be forwarded to the full Planning Commission, basically subject to those ordinances either being met or variances being sought for those. And again, our conditions of approval include a subdivision committee recommendation on the right-of-way dedication and the street improvements, some of those plat comments, and then all the other conditions of approval as issued by city staff. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Masters. Is there anyone else from city staff who wishes to speak to this item?
Engineering.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Josh with engineering.
Yes.
We had a few comments on this one as well. Just a typical 8-inch water line extension, for water, domestic water and a fire hydrant. Sanitary sewer was extended with the overall subdivision immediately adjacent to the property. It's currently under development, it's close to being finalized out, so that public sewer will exist, when this project is at that construction stage. Drainage, they're meeting, all four of our minimum standards through the use of a detention pond and a proprietary separator device. There is one comment that we have as far as the pond outfall goes. So there's an extension of that subdivision being developed directly south of where the pond is proposed to discharge. And then drainage easement is proposed along that property's western boundary where the discharge pipe is located. So we're asking the applicant to investigate what it would take to connect to that pipe. So we can get both those storm systems connected and then eventually out to the creek. That would be the biggest comment as far as drainage goes for us, but we're recommending it be approved.
All right, thank you, Mr. Procaccio. Is there anyone else from city staff who wishes to speak to this item?
I think urban forestry is present, I'd like to call on them.
All right, Mr. Scott, do you have any comments on this?
I do not have any comments.
All right, thank you very much. All right, if there's no further comment from city staff, I'll open it up to the applicant. Is the applicant online and ready to speak to this item? Mr. Murray.
Hello, Blake Murray with ESI. Thanks for having me on this morning. Figured I'd touch on just a few things in general. I'm good with staff support. I think the building material types that Ms. Masters referenced can easily be worked out during the construction plan process and through the building permit process actually too. I also agree with her assessment of it having too much metal. We'll add some brick or stone to the front to bring that back under 50% and break it up into the 40-foot segments that she was saying. We're totally okay with that. Josh's, or Mr. Procaccio's comment about the drainage, that subdivision to the south of us getting a complete makeover. Y'all, many of y'all were there for Tech Plat the other week, and there were just many comments still remaining. So Josh, I think we can add a ditch in there and properly handle the water, but it's something I think we can look at when we turn back in Weddington West. But I think your comment's a good comment. Apart from that, I really don't have anything else to add. I'm happy to try to answer any questions that anybody has.
Thank you. So Mr. Murray, do you anticipate that you would not need to be requesting additional variances and that any comments could be addressed with staff?
Yes, ma'am. My goal in life is to never ask for variances.
Well, that's my goal in life, that people don't need to apply for variances, and you know my position on that, so thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item?
There's no one present online.
All right, there is no one from the public online, and so I will open it up to Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Brink.
Madam Chair, just to get some clarity from the client, with the design standards not meeting current code, is the plan to get that fixed before it comes to the full planning commission?
Commissioner Johnson, yes, we will, we'll get that revised prior to planning commission. If nothing else, I'll add some call outs to our current one and make sure to show that we're meeting it with the material types. But I'll work with this master's offline and make sure that we're in compliance.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Yeah, typically, as far as I'm trying to think back on how we typically approach these, I don't think the commission has been lenient with this type of code variance when it comes to the metal requirements and typically the articulation of building as well. So I'm in favor of moving it forward if we can get these resolved before the next, before it hits the full planning commission meeting.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brink?
Second is, I hope Commissioner Johnson made a motion. If that is so, I'm seconding.
Well, I'll say this, because if we were to approve this as is, even if we don't have the information, they would still have to meet all city standards. So even if they didn't have it before the next planning commission meeting, which I hope we would have, and it sounds like that's what the applicant is wanting to do, even if we don't have that, if we were to send this on, they would still have to meet all of the requirements, including regarding the material type and then the elevation changes. So my personal preference, I think it would be okay to move to forward, and I also think it would be okay to forward it and put it on consent agenda, because if there's going to have to, if they're planning to meet all city standards anyway, then there's really nothing for us to debate, if that makes sense. But we don't have a motion on the table.
I can turn around and make a motion, that's not an issue. I'll move that we forward LSD 2022-016 with conditions in favor of recommended right-of-way dedication, in favor of recommended street improvements, all other conditions as recommended by staff. And I'm okay with placing it on the consent agenda because we can pull it off if it's an issue.
I'll second Commissioner Johnson's motion.
All right, thank you very much, and I will be the third vote in favor, so that item will be moving forward to the full planning commission with a recommendation of approval and a recommendation that it be placed on the consent agenda. Is that all of the items of new business, Ms. Masters?
That is.
Okay, so we'll move on to announcements. Just real quickly, Commissioner Johnson, thank you for filling in for me at the last commission meeting. I will not need you to fill in on any June meetings, thank goodness, and I'm sure you're very pleased about that as well. Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Brink, do you have anything? All right, Ms. Masters, you.
No announcements from staff today.
All right, well, appreciate y'all's time, meeting adjourned.